Welcome, everyone. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I'm a member of the Inspira Advantage team. Thank you for joining us while we talk to two of our amazing consultants about how to answer the why do you want to become a doctor question, which is just constantly popping up during your med school applications, and I'm sure quite a bit after as well. So Inspira Advantage, just to give you a background, is an admissions consulting company that works with aspiring medical students through their candidacy development, MCAT studying, application prep, secondaries, all the way through interviews, getting into the schools that you want to be getting into. We're there to help through any and all of the process. So let's go through our agenda for tonight. So we'll introduce our two fantastic panelists. We'll just talk about the question, why do you want to be a doctor? Why does it exist? Why is it important? We'll talk about how to draft your answer, the first steps you should take, and then how to form that answer to your essays and your interviews, things that you should avoid when asking that question and answering it, tips to set yourself up for success, and then we'll open things up for a Q&A. So if you have questions throughout this, pop those questions in the Q&A box, and we will definitely get to those at the end. So we have Jen Talbot and Neil Jareth here with us today. Jen, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Jen. I'm currently an intern or PGY1 at Duke University in OBGYN. And before that, I was in med school at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. So excited to be here with y'all.
Thanks so much for being here, Jen. It's always a pleasure to have you. Neil, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Neil Jareth. I'm a PGY2 dermatology resident at NYU right now. Been working with Inspira for a while and definitely excited to talk about this question.
Awesome. Thank you as well for being here. Also a pleasure to have you. I feel like you two are in a lot of our webinars and we always get great information from both of you. I'm glad to have both of you together for this one. So we'll dive right into about the question, why do you want to be a doctor? Neil, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's a pretty important question. I mean, not only for the application, I would say, but to ask yourself before you go down the path of medical school. It's a pretty long road. So I think it's important to make sure that's well formulated in your head before you put it down on paper. And I think, it's the sum of your experiences that led to where you are currently. If you're thinking about applying to medical school, you probably have a reason for it. So I think the purpose of this really is, for you on one hand, but for us to get a sense of, what it is that drove you to come here. When we're reading a ton of applications, it's hard to find things that stick out as unique among like the big stack that we get handed. And I think stories stick in our minds. So if you are someone who can tell a unique narrative about what brought you to medicine and what makes you want to stay, it does provide some context to the application that sticks in our minds later on. And it's kind of like a checkbox at the same time too. Do you have a good enough answer that convinces us, like this is someone who really wants to be in medical school. This is someone who wants to complete the training that it takes to become a doctor and who wants to be, a lifelong learner committed to taking care of patients, or at least committed to serving the medical field in some way or another down the road.
Thanks so much for that answer. Jen, do you have anything else to add to that before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Neil said is right on the money. I think sometimes people get frustrated because they feel like this is such a basic, obvious question. Like, of course I want to why wouldn't I want to go to medical school? I'm applying. But, you have to realize that, we don't know you and admissions committees don't know you. And this is really your opportunity to share your passions and what inspires you and what excites you. So it's definitely the most important question and not just something that you're being kind of forced to explain or small talk or whatever. It's actually a really exciting opportunity for people to learn about you.
So it sounds like when reviewing applications, it's a question that the committees will take really seriously and looking at and spend quite a bit of time um, going over and talking about when talking about your application.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, so where do you even begin when you start to answer the question? Jen, you
So,
want to take this one?
yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways that people kind of end up on this path and end up applying into medical school. And, I think there's a really good opportunity before you even start this application journey to just spend some time on self-reflection and really sit with yourself, and however that process looks like, whether it's journaling or having conversations with loved ones or meditating, or however you process, but really try to understand what's motivating you and what's driving you. And really trying to remember, well, what were the situations or experiences that got you to this point, and what are you most looking forward to in your future when you imagine yourself as a doctor, and talk about it with people. I think that when you're going to be sharing part of this journey and your reasons with this unknown audience, it's really helpful to kind of bounce your ideas and reflections off of a lot of different other people who can kind of help you refine what you're trying to articulate. So this isn't something that I would say you need to journal out and keep really private and not share with anybody. It's definitely the opposite. Chat with your loved ones and mentors and family members and whoever you're bringing along this journey with you about it. Try to help you get a clear insight into why you're doing this.
Great. Neil, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, super well said. I think that's all super important information. The only thing I would add is that there's not really a right answer. And I think that's important to know going in. Like, you may be tempted to put down a cookie cutter answer that you Googled a few medical student personal statements, and you think there's one way to write a medical school personal statement, but that's totally not true. I mean, I've read a lot of them, and I think people find different paths to medicine. For example, you may be someone who wants to engage in direct patient care, and that's probably, I'd say, most people that are applying to medical school, and that's great. I mean, I think that's one way to be a physician or use your medical training. I think another way to use it might be, for example, you want to help patients through innovation, through building things, through building a company even. You can say those sorts of things, provided you can back it up with the rest of your application. But it's important to tell a unique narrative that explains you and why you want to go to medical school.
All right, so something else when you're thinking about this is to think about the stories that matter most to you. Neil, you want to take this a little bit further?
Yeah, for sure. This is something I encourage people to start doing super early on. Even like a year before the application starts, for example, just start jotting down some things. Just start jotting down some things, like from your experiences in the past that you feel like were important or formative in some way. And then you can kind of build that list over time. When you think about some aspect of it that you may not have remembered when you initially wrote it down, just add it to your list. And eventually you build this list of formative experiences that kind of tells a story, or you can craft into a story. Those may be research experiences, they may be work experiences, volunteer experiences, some leadership experience that you really spent a long time building or cultivating. They could even be personal stories, right? Interactions you've had with people or patients that made you interested in medicine. Or a milestone or a life event, for example, that really catalyzed your desire to pursue medicine in some way. So they can be very different. Again, I think this is a point we're going to harp on pretty often. But I would say start building that list early on.
Great. Jen, anything else to add there?
No, I mean, I think that pretty much covers it. I would just say that, feel free to be creative and honest. And, we kind of already highlighted this, but these experiences don't always have to just be related to medicine. You can be really surprised about what different life experiences or job experiences, led you down this path and might make you a more unique and well-rounded and competitive applicant.
Thank you. All right, so diving a little bit deeper into those stories that matter.
Yeah, I think this is a good practice that you'll do even when you're working on your secondaries and your answers to kind of other typical interview questions. But, kind of taking all of that brain dump and brainstorming and trying to highlight those specific themes or times, and perhaps making a timeline or identifying those specific events that really led you down this path. And with that, you're kind of trying to create a little bit of a story bank to help understand your motivation for why you want to be a doctor, and also to use those stories for your personal statement or for your secondaries or during your interviews when you get asked this question. This is all kind of practice and preparing for those different stages of your application.
This very much reminds me of just starting to write your personal statements for college, but a little bit more of a specific topic. Neil, anything else to input here?
No, I totally agree. It does feel like writing it for college, and it continues, by the way. I mean, same thing for residency. It'll just keep going down the same road. But yeah, I think what Jen said is excellent. I think I have nothing to add. Yeah, so just to follow up on that, there are a couple of ways to organize these events that you've now written down and organized in some way or another when you're actually putting it down on paper in the form of a personal statement. I, for one, I think for maybe all of my personal statements, I've used this sort of series of events scaffold because it makes sense in my head, and I think it makes sense in other people's heads, but maybe it doesn't sometimes. I don't know. Anyway, that's basically a sort of scaffold where one event leads to another, and this all kind of fits together like a puzzle for why you decided you wanted to pursue medicine. For others, it may really be just one big moment that everything else centers around. So one big moment sparked your desire to do medicine, and you kind of built on that with other little experiences along the way. And maybe that's how you structure your personal statement, or maybe there's another way to structure a personal statement that I can't think of off the top of my head right now. But experiment around. This is why I say it's important to write the personal statement earlier, to try to answer these questions early, because you can kind of play around with what you think fits best for your unique story. And eventually, having other people read it, give advice to you, reading it over yourself a few times, you'll kind of figure out what feels right, and what kind of makes it all click to fit that final image of the puzzle that you're trying to build.
Absolutely. Jen, do you have any other thoughts around this?
No, I think that was great. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah. All right. So you kind of have an answer to the question. You're going to have to apply that to essays and interviews. And as Neil said, really through your whole medical career, at least education. So let's talk a little bit more about how to approach the question for your personal statement.
So I think this is a really important part of the narrative building that we like to work on with our clients. When you're crafting your personal statement and kind of putting together your whole application, we like to think about themes. What is this package that represents you and your experiences that you're going to present to other people? And it's really important to be specific and powerful and honest about this, because it's you have to remember that admissions counselors are looking through a lot of applications and they're flipping through a lot of papers, and they really want something that they can sink their teeth into, that they're able to flip through these pages and understand who you are and what motivates you. And that's usually better done if you have a central theme to what you're presenting to them instead of just 100 different ideas. And so taking all that reflection that you did and all of those stories and all those people you talked to, and trying to develop that main point about why you want to be a doctor. And part of this is going to be what really excites you and what gets into the really specifics of why you want to be a doctor or what you see yourself doing. And sometimes that can be really hard to do if you don't know exactly where you see yourself or what you want to do. And in those cases, it's better to be honest and just focus on, what kind of provider you see yourself being in terms of how you want to act with patients, or maybe the types of patients that you want to serve, even if you don't know, for example, a specific specialty. And another really powerful way that you can approach a personal statement with the why you want to be a doctor is showing that how you've developed the skills to be a good doctor. And so it's not just saying that I want to do this, but why you would also be good at it and why they would choose you. So this is all kind of what factors into your personal statement and factors into this application presentation that you're going to be sharing with admissions committees.
Very well said. Any follow-up, Neil?
Yeah, Jen said something super poignant, which I just want to emphasize, which was that, when we're flipping through all these applications, we are looking for something to like sink our teeth into. I think that that's so true. Like we're always looking for someone to root for, you know what I mean? Like when we're reading all these applications, and I think it's true that if you are, being honest, being true to yourself, and, really putting your passion down on paper or in words, it'll kind of come through, and we can pretty much tell for the most part when that's the case. It all makes sense with the application. It all kind of clicks, and that's the type of applicant we try to root for. Is the person who has really crafted a strong, unique narrative and that stands out from the rest of the pack, which we'll go into in a little bit more depth in just a sec.
Great. All right. Some things to keep in mind while thinking about your personal statement and why you want to be a doctor.
Yeah, so like jumping off that last point, you are in competition with so many really strong candidates, and I feel like the pool just gets stronger, every year. So I think it's really important that you find a way to stand out, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be with your grades or your scores or your research anymore. I think it's all of that plus a story. I think as humans, we just enjoy hearing stories, we enjoy telling stories, and we latch onto those. So every single one of you has some unique reason or unique path to medicine. And even though it kind of may fit some general box, there are unique characteristics about how you built it. So I think it's important to showcase that and draw from those personal experiences you've had and be able to communicate those in a way that we can understand.
Any additional thoughts, Jen?
No, I love everything that Neil said, especially about how even it can sometimes maybe seem a little bit straightforward or plain, or basic, your motivations, but as long as they're honest and true to yourself. I feel like one of my just personal biggest pet peeves is like the really like weird, funky, bizarre story of like this person went on like one service trip once and like handed out a bottle of water to like a baby elephant and saved someone's life or something like that. And now they want to be a doctor. And I'm like, great, but you're not going to be traveling to far off lands always and saving baby elephants. And what does this have to do with medicine? Everybody kind of wants that like fun, sexy story. And it's just not real life and it's not realistic. And it doesn't tell us anything about really why you want to do medicine and what would make you a good doctor. And so, don't feel that pressure to be extremely unique and different, and just be honest. And, this is a really hard path, and you wouldn't be going through all of this work if you didn't really want it, or you shouldn't be if you don't really want it, because it is a lot of hard work. So just share what's driving you and keeping you studying up late at night and keeping you, nose to the grind and pen to paper, and those reasons will be good enough.
You touched on a question that I was going to ask that definitely comes up a lot for kind of this question and essays in general, kind of at all levels. It's like how you definitely want to stand out, but does that mean you need to be dramatic? Does that mean you need to be talking about trauma, or you mentioned that service trip, that kind of out of nowhere story that's a little bit cliche, but may have had a meaning to you, but is definitely like played up and overplayed in some ways. What are both you and Neil's thoughts on kind of how to stand out, but like kind of the best ways to do that appropriately?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is like this phrase that probably everybody has heard and is sick of, but the show don't tell. And, it's different if you share this story about a trip that you went on that really inspired you to work on health disparities and public health and started this whole interest in international health disparities. And you brought that passion back with you to college and med school, and you started a group where you get together and watch documentaries and talk about it. That's a different story than that 1 week service trip that you took that one time and never followed up on, because you're showing us more of how those experiences and stories led you to this journey and not just telling us something that happened to you. So I know that distinction can be kind of difficult sometimes, and that's why you're sharing your motivations and your personal statement with a dozen people. And if 10 of them come back to you and say this story is really lame and you should change it, then you should probably change it. But that's part of the crowdsourcing of feedback that you should be doing.
I like how you answered that. Neil, any other thoughts to that question or a different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have said most of it. I agree that, it's really hard to like throw a wow factor into personal statements. I mean, I think if you try really hard to do it, you're going to overdo it, and it's not going to end up well for anyone. I think the thing that stands out when we're looking through a lot of applications is a theme of some sort. I mean, having, some sort of, it doesn't have to be like every single activity you do is like health disparities or health equity or innovation, for example. But maybe having like a bit of a running theme throughout your activities or throughout the story, the way you tell it, at least, will make you like the health disparities applicant or the innovation applicant, or someone that we can kind of hook onto when we're, rooting for you in the committee meeting later on. But yeah, it's really hard to stand out, I would say, just from the personal statement alone. And I wouldn't try to go for the baby elephant story. You know what I mean? I think, just keep it honest, be real. I think that's one of the things that applicants don't do a lot of the time. And it kind of gets on my nerves, and probably a lot of other people's nerves as well. But be honest. We can tell when you're not being honest. And I think that's the best way to stand out.
Great. You did touch on activities there, and definitely you're going to talk about some of those in your personal statement, but how important is it that your narrative about wanting to be a doctor and your personal statement are matching up meaningfully with your work and activities lists and then your interviews? Should there be that like very strong thread through all of those? So you are talking about like health disparity and all of that work. I'm assuming you want more than one couple hour volunteer experience in that to really make an impact.
Yeah, that's super important. I mean, you can't have your whole application be, sports volunteering, and then all of a sudden you're writing about health disparities. It doesn't make any sense that way. It has to link up in some way or another, and you should show some demonstrated interest in whatever you're writing about later on, and that'll come through in your application as well. You have room on each of those little experiences to write a little blurb about that experience, like what you learned, what you did, and that can sort of serve as a little extra personal statement in a way, that can like be a preface to your real personal statement, or at least a bolster to it later on.
We do have a webinar on that. You can go find that on our webinars page on our website for free. And I think we'll also be talking about just crafting the narrative and bringing that through your whole application in a couple of weeks. So sign up for that also. But I think it's definitely important to keep in mind when talking about the why do you want to be a doctor? All right, let's keep moving on and talk about how to approach this question in your interviews.
Yeah, we kind of have touched on this, previously, but the reason why they're gonna ask you this question in one form or another in interviews and in secondaries over and over again is because they want to learn about you and your motivations, and they just want to make sure that you're a thoughtful and serious person. Because if you can't answer this question very well after all of this work, by the time you've gotten to an interview, they're gonna, or I would wonder, and I'm sure other people would wonder too, if you're, doing this for the right reasons and if you're really going to be here to stick it out for the long haul. Because, the fact is sometimes kind of people find themselves on this path, whether it's maybe their parents were doctors or they couldn't really figure out anything to do. And every year people enter med school and they drop out because they figure that this isn't really what they want to do and it's not the right path for them. And a admissions committee is really looking for somebody that they can invest in. They want to pick somebody who they know is going to take their training seriously and take what education they can give them and is going to last and stick it out, because med students are expensive. They invest a lot of time and energy and resources into you. So they want to make sure that you're as serious about it as they are. So I think that is, at least from a committee kind of standpoint, what they're looking for.
That makes a lot of sense. Anything else here, Neil, before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I would just say I think this is almost harder. This is actually definitely harder than writing it down in a personal statement, because you feel like you're put on the spot and you have to answer this question in like 60 seconds without boring the person in front of you. So it does take some preparation, just like Jen said. I mean, you can't just go in there cold and expect to give a brilliant answer. Maybe you're that kind of person, but most people aren't. So I think you really have to prepare. It's like an elevator pitch. You have 60 seconds to sell this person on why you're here. So keep that in mind, if and when you get to this point.
Thank you. All right, so a little bit more about answering this question in interviews.
Yeah, so again, this is hard. Interviewing is a skill, certainly. But the good news is you've kind of prepared by writing this entire application with all of your experiences. You spent hours and hours thinking about your experiences, writing this personal statement about why you want to go to med school. So just stick to the basics, stick to the things you've been doing for the months leading up to this interview. The themes that have been running throughout your application, whether it be health disparities, international health, and keep in mind, this is the chance you get to expand beyond what your personal statement says. You may feel limited by your personal statement when you're writing it. I think a lot of people do, because it's a limited amount of space. But this is when you get to peel back the onion a little bit. They ask about a superficial thing on your personal statement. You get to really explain in depth about why that was meaningful to you, for example. And, this gives you a chance to connect with your interviewer. Saying something beyond the personal statement might trigger a thought in the interviewer's head. Or they may just want to talk about playing tennis the whole time, which definitely happens. So this is your chance to just talk about whatever you and the interviewer want to talk about. It's a chance to build a relationship and build a rapport. So think of it as a conversation more than an interview, and I think it'll go better for you.
That makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts here, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think really leaning on the connection and getting excited, and that enthusiasm always shines through much better than a rote, memorized, 30-second speech that you've practiced in the mirror over and over again. If you spend more time talking about tennis than the 10 reasons why you want to be a doctor, then that's probably a more successful interview. And you should be excited while you're answering this question. Like, this is a huge accomplishment, getting this far, or even thinking about getting this far. And it's really exciting. You're going to be a doctor. This is an amazing job. This should be exciting. And it should be something you're smiling and happy about when you're sharing why you want to do this job.
It's a great thing to remember. I think it's easy to get bogged down in the stress of the application cycle, and all of your other commitments as well.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that. Just smile. It makes the whole interview go so much better for both of us.
All right, what are some things that you should avoid? We talked about this a little bit with the baby elephant, but let's talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I really liked something that Neil said earlier about don't just Google this answer and, and repeat it. Why do I want to go to medical school? And then just say what the internet tells you. So don't be generic. I mean, everybody wants to help people unless you're a sociopath. Be specific. Why do you want to help people? Why do you want to be in medicine? Don't regurgitate information. It's obviously very okay to talk about things you've included in your application, but think of it more as an opportunity to fill in some of those details or explain more about those stories you shared, or something that you maybe brought up in your personal statement that you'd like to dive into. And remember, and this is also going to come with practice, to not just word vomit and be directionless and repeat yourself and talk for 10 minutes straight. It's good to be short and sweet and articulate, and that just comes from practice, practice, practice. And finally, as we keep saying over and over and over again, be just honest and genuine and authentic, because we see a lot of applicants and hear a lot of answers, and everybody knows when you're faking it. Everybody knows when you're lying, and everybody knows when you're, telling me what you think that I want to hear. So just be honest, even if you think that your honest answer isn't as exciting maybe as some others, at least it's your answer.
Great tips. Any other thoughts here, Neil?
No, not really. I mean, having direction in your answer is so important, but that just comes with preparation. And yeah, we've regurgitated this a couple of times as well, but don't say what people want to hear. I mean, you may think you know what people want to hear, but you may be totally off base, and they're choosing to interview you because they want to know what you have to say. They don't want to listen to what they have listened to a million times already. So keep that in mind when you're there for the interview.
And we are definitely regurgitating a lot of this information to drive it home, but you don't need to do that with your interview and essay. All right, let's dive into some other tips that we have before we open things up for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, now's the time to put it in the Q&A box, and we will get to those right after the next slide.
Yeah, so I think this is in a lot of ways a summary of the things we've talked about, but I think structure is important when you're thinking about how to answer this question, because you're going to have amassed so many experiences by this time in your life that it may just feel like this swirling mess by the time you start to write an application. And structuring it helps you maybe box some of those experiences into groups that you can kind of draw upon to fill some specific niche in your story or some purpose as to what drove you to become a doctor. And just like we said, not to go around in circles during your interview responses, I think it's important not to do that in your personal statement either. I mean, have a direction with a personal statement, have a clear end goal you want to drive home in mind. And it's the same sort of things we learned in elementary school, and we were writing paragraphs and writing essays. Like, have a thesis statement to some degree, like outline what you're going to say, and drive that back home again in your concluding paragraph. Be honest about why you're applying to medical school. Again, that's, I think, one of the most important things here. And don't be afraid to just scrap an entire personal statement or scrap an entire answer to this question and redo the whole thing, because sometimes you'll get a much better answer out of it. And I probably did that a couple of times, both when answering, why medicine, why dermatology, and I think I ended up better for it both times. And in your interviews as well, Jen touched on this before, prepare, but if you end up preparing so much to become a robot, what's going to happen, I promise you, is that you're going to be tripped up by one little thing, and your entire robotic speech is going to go to shambles because you're overthinking it and you don't know how to respond to this little break in the algorithm. So you should prepare, certainly have answers to draw upon, but don't make it so rote that you can't adapt.
Fantastic. I think we covered all of those basically. Jen, anything else to add to this?
No, I don't think so. I think Neil covered it really well.
All right. Well, we talked a lot about answering a very personal question that can also be have a lot of generic answers. And it's definitely something that is so individual that we can give personal advice on without having a lot more context. And everyone has such a unique answer. But if you have any questions about kind of how to come to that answer and ways to adapt it for different circumstances, definitely pop them into the Q&A box. And Jen and Neil, I'll just ask you, like, what is something that you wish you had known when answering this question during your application cycles, that you maybe didn't know or didn't really focus on as much that you wish you would have or would recommend that your clients do?
I think to some degree it's hard to shake the feeling that medical school admissions committees want to hear a certain answer. And I don't think I completely shook that feeling until I got to medical school and started reviewing applications and started realizing that things I liked reading were not necessarily the cookie cutter answers that we were programmed to think medical schools wanted to hear. That being said, this is not necessarily something I didn't know writing my personal statement, but just to say the obvious, I think it's important not to talk about very superficial things when you're applying to medical school. I think in practicality, some of these things may be true, right? But you definitely don't want to write that you're going to medical school because of job security, because of a nice salary, because of a better lifestyle. These are not things you want to say. You want to talk about, what it is that drives you to make this your career rather than just a job. So I think, although that may seem obvious, sometimes in the rare case it's not. So I read a personal statement here and there that just surprises me. So I figure I'd tell you all about that.
Definitely a good thing to keep in mind, and something we should put on our things to avoid list for next time as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, while you were talking of kind of the opposite of what some of my favorite ones have been. And, I've always loved hearing those reasons that aren't always necessarily related to medicine or direct patient care. I just worked with a client who was a teacher for a few years and was now switching her careers and going into medicine. And for her, she wanted to be a doctor because she loved educating and she loves teaching. And that's such a huge part of what we do as doctors every day is, every day we're teaching patients. And, for her, that was her genuine, authentic answers. I love this stuff and I want to work with people and I want to coach them and I want to teach them. And, I think that's a fantastic motivation. And it was a really amazing personal statement and she rocked all of her interviews. So, even if you think that your reasons for being a doctor maybe aren't as traditional as you think they should be, I think being a physician can look very different in a lot of different ways, and your career, is limitless. And so, just be honest about what's driving you here.
Thank you. I think both you and Neil had great answers to that, and things that, especially talking about teaching with medicine, it's not something you necessarily think of when you think of a doctor, but is such a big part of the job. Definitely something for our participants to think about.
Doctor actually means to teach, believe it or not.
Fun facts.
Fun fact.
I love it. All right. Well, I think Neil, Jen, are there any questions or like answers to questions that you think are important that we add in here that we maybe haven't covered today?
Nothing that's popping to mind for me. But I would say that, a lot of the things we're talking about in this specific question, like why you want to become a doctor, are fairly broadly applicable to the rest of the application. There may be some specifics to this question, I guess, that we talked about, but a lot of the interviewing tips, a lot of the writing tips are definitely important to consider when putting together the entire application as well.
So it sounds like this is something you really should be thinking about from before you even commit to applying to med school and while you're beginning about thinking about going down this path.
Yeah, I would just add that this can be hard. You might know you want to do this and you might have strong motivations, but putting it into words and kind of being able to say it succinctly and articulately, it can be difficult. It can take some time. So, just work through the process and give yourself some grace if in 2 days you aren't able to come up with your perfect elevator pitch. And sometimes it can take weeks or months. I felt like I couldn't even really say it and put it into words until after I'd written my personal statement. So, just know that it is a process and, work with people who are rooting for you and have your back. And, don't panic if this isn't something you're able to do overnight. Answer this question.
Definitely. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. I want to thank both Neil and Jen for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you both be a part of these webinars. I definitely learn a lot, and I know our participants do as well. For those of you joining us, we're going to send out an email in the coming day or so that has a recording of this webinar. You can also schedule a consultation with our team and we can talk about how we might be able to help you through your application process. And if you are having trouble answering this question and want some advice, definitely reach out to us. We have people like Jen and Neil here to help with that exact thing. I hope everyone has a really great evening. Again, thank you, Neil and Jen. It's been great talking to you all.
Thanks so much. Nice to meet you, Neil.
You too. Good luck, everyone on the call.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.